Most people pretended not to hear it. They studied their wine lists with sudden intensity, laughed a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny, checked their phones, as if the most important message of their lives had just arrived. The maitre d' smoothed his tie and looked everywhere, except toward the private dining room where Marcus Rothwell, CEO of Rothwell Industries and one of the richest men in the country, was destroying his wife. "Please, Marcus, the baby." Elena's voice cracked through the door, desperate and thin. A crash followed. Then silence. The kind of silence that makes you realize how loud your own heartbeat can be. Sarah Chen, a waitress working her third double shift that week, stood frozen with a tray of champagne flutes. Her hands trembled so violently that the glasses began to rattle against each other, creating a sound like tiny helpless bells. She'd seen Elena Rothwell earlier that evening, 7 months pregnant and glowing despite the fear that flickered behind her carefully applied smile, the kind of fear Sarah recognized because she'd worn it herself once. Years ago, before she found the courage to leave. "We don't get involved," the manager, Tom, whispered harshly in her ear, gripping her elbow. "Do you understand me? That man owns half the commercial real estate in this city. We don't get involved." Another crash. A whimper. The sound of someone hitting the wall. Sarah looked around the restaurant. 50 people, maybe more. All dressed in clothes that cost more than her monthly rent. All of them suddenly deaf. A woman in a Chanel dress inspected her manicure. A man in a custom suit signaled for another scotch. A young couple took a selfie, angling their faces to capture the chandelier's sparkle behind them. "Somebody has to do something," Sarah breathed. Tom's grip tightened. "And lose everything? Your job, my job, everyone's job here? He'll sue us into oblivion. He'll destroy this place. Is that what you want?" Through the window, Sarah could see her reflection. A tired 34-year-old woman with dark circles under her eyes and a polyester uniform that never quite fit right. Behind her reflection, she could see the door to the private room closed. Silent now. Too silent. She thought about her daughter, Lily, asleep at her mother's apartment. 8 years old and finally starting to forget the nights when her father came home angry, finally starting to believe that the world could be safe. "Someone has to do something," she said again, but her voice had no strength in it. Her feet stayed planted to the floor. That's when the front door opened and the bikers walked in. There were 6 of them, led by a man who looked like he'd been carved from granite and weathered by hard years. Leather vests, worn jeans, boots that had walked 1,000 miles of rough road. The kind of men society had taught Sarah to fear, to cross the street to avoid, to clutch her purse tighter around. The hostess, Jessica, went pale. "I'm sorry, but we have a dress code." The lead biker held up a hand. He was maybe 55, with gray threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen things, terrible things probably, but also beautiful things, eyes that were still paying attention. "We heard screaming," he said simply. His voice was gravelly, but there was something gentle underneath it. "From outside. A woman screaming." "There's no—" Tom started. A sob broke through the door of the private room. Raw and broken. The sound of someone who had given up on being rescued. The biker's jaw tightened. He looked at Tom, then at the door, then back at Tom. "You going to do something about that?" "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private establishment." "Is it private when someone's getting hurt?" This came from a woman in the group, maybe 40, with braided hair and a scar running down her left cheek. Her eyes found Sarah's, and something passed between them. Recognition, the kind that doesn't need words. Tom's face flushed red. "You don't understand. That's Marcus Rothwell in there. I don't care if he's the president of the United States," the lead biker said. "Someone's hurting in there, and everyone's just standing around." He looked around the restaurant, and Sarah watched 50 wealthy diners suddenly find their shoes fascinating. "What's wrong with you people?" No one answered. The only sound was the soft jazz playing through the speakers, obscenely cheerful. The biker started walking toward the private room. Tom jumped in front of him. "You can't, I'll call the police." "Good, call them. They should have been called 10 minutes ago." He moved Tom aside, not roughly, but firmly, the way you might move a child who didn't understand danger. His hand was reaching for the door handle when it opened from the inside. Marcus Rothwell stood in the doorway. 6'2", silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a suit that cost more than Sarah made in 6 months. His knuckles were red. His eyes were cold, the kind of cold that had been born in privilege and nurtured by the knowledge that consequences were for other people. Is there a problem? His voice could have frozen water. Behind him, barely visible in the dim light of the private room, Sarah could see Elena crumpled in a chair, one hand cradling her swollen belly, the other pressed against her bleeding lip. She wasn't crying anymore. Her eyes were empty, gone somewhere far away where the pain couldn't reach. Yeah, the biker said. There's a problem. Marcus's smile was a predator's smile. Do you know who I am? Nope, don't care. I could buy and sell you 1,000 times over. I could make one phone call and ruin your life. Marcus's voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. I could make you disappear. The biker stepped closer, not intimidated, just close enough that Marcus had to look up slightly to meet his eyes. But you can't buy back your humanity, can you? And you sure as hell can't buy back hers. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in Marcus's face. Shame, maybe, or fear? The expression of a man who'd forgotten what it was like to be held accountable. Then it was gone, replaced by rage. Get out of my sight before you what? Beat me up too. The woman with the braided hair had joined them. Then another biker. Then the rest, forming a wall of leather in defiance. You only hit women who can't fight back? Sarah found herself moving. She didn't decide to move. Her feet just carried her forward, setting down the tray of champagne, walking past Tom's grabbing hands, past the empty faces of people who had chosen comfort over courage. She walked until she stood beside the bikers. Her 5'3" frame absurd next to their bulk, her uniform ridiculous next to their road-worn leather. Elena needs help, she said. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. She needs a hospital. This is none of your business, Marcus snarled. This is my wife. She's a human being, Sarah said, and someone has to give a damn. Something shifted in the restaurant. Maybe it was the sight of a small waitress standing up to a billionaire. Maybe it was the 6 bikers who'd walked into a world that wasn't theirs to defend, someone they'd never met. Maybe it was just shame, finally finding its way through the armor of indifference. A man at table 7 stood up. He was older, wearing an expensive suit. I'm calling 911, he announced. His hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. A woman at table 12, the one in the Chanel dress, stood too. I'm a witness. I saw everything. I heard everything. Her voice cracked. God forgive me, I almost let it happen. Then another person stood, and another, until finally, the restaurant full of people who had chosen silence chose something else instead. Marcus looked around, and for the first time Sarah saw real fear in his eyes. Not fear of the bikers or the cops who were coming. Fear of being seen. Really seen for what he was. The lead biker moved past Marcus into the room. He knelt beside Elena with surprising gentleness for such a rough-looking man. Ma'am, can you hear me? Help's coming. You're going to be okay. Your baby's going to be okay. Elena lifted her head. Tears streamed down her bruised face, but there was something new in her eyes. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that someone finally had stopped pretending not to see. Later, after the ambulances came and took Elena away, after the police led Marcus out in handcuffs, money could buy a lot of things, but not dozens of witnesses. After the restaurant emptied and the night grew quiet again, Sarah found the lead biker standing in the parking lot beside a row of motorcycles. Thank you, she said. He shrugged. Couldn't not do something. Everyone else could. Everyone else did. Yeah, he looked sad about that. But not you. You stood up too. Only after you did. Maybe, but you still did it. He swung a leg over his motorcycle. You know what we are? Me and my crew? Sarah shook her head. Group home kids, most of us. Foster care failures. The kind of people society crosses the street to avoid. He smiled. But it was bitter. We know what it's like when nobody stops the monster. When everyone just looks away because it's easier. So you decided to be the ones who stop? Someone has to give a damn, he said, echoing her own words back to her. He started his engine and the others followed suit. The sound was thunder in the quiet night. What's your name? Sarah called out over the noise. Jack and that woman with the braid? That's Maria. The rest? Well, they've all got their own stories about the time nobody came to help. He pulled on his helmet. Elena's story gets to be different. She gets to be the one someone saved. They rode off into the darkness, their taillights fading like red stars. Sarah stood alone in the parking lot, thinking about courage and humanity and the strange truth that sometimes the most dangerous-looking people are the ones with the biggest hearts, thinking about how evil doesn't triumph because it's strong, but because good people choose convenience over conviction. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother. Lily wants to say goodnight. Sarah smiled and headed for her car. Tomorrow she'd visit Elena at the hospital. Tomorrow she'd probably start looking for a new job since Tom was already talking about reliability issues. Tomorrow the world would still be hard and unfair and full of people who looked away, but tonight for once the right thing had happened. Not because of money or power or status, but because a few people, a waitress and some bikers and eventually a restaurant, full of guilty witnesses had decided that someone had to give a damn. And sometimes, Sarah thought as she drove home through the sleeping city, sometimes that's enough. Sometimes just one person deciding to care can crack open the door for everyone else's courage to finally walk through. Sometimes the monsters lose, not because heroes defeat them, but because ordinary people remember they have a choice. And sometimes the people you're taught to fear turn out to be exactly the ones brave enough to save you.